Okay, well, thank you very much for that. I'm going to move us on a little bit to look perhaps at the other side of the coin and ask Cleo at the front here to ask us a question about managing expectations.
Hi, I'm working in a local authority, Bath and North East Somerset Council, working on the local development framework, so sort of strategic level policy for the city, and do quite a lot of work in terms of community involvement. And my question really relates to a specific example, so I'm going to talk a bit about that before I actually ask my question. At the moment we have a regional planning process which has proposals which are actually requirements, and then local authorities are then tasked with actually taking these forward and discussing the detail with the community. And what we're finding is that this regional process is a process that people feel very angry about, something that they feel has disenfranchised them and taken away their power of local decision making. So when we're going out hoping to engage people in a positive way and sort of look at how we can actually take this requirement forward, I just want to know, how can we actually do this in a positive way? Essentially, my question is, how can we engage communities positively on an issue in terms of the detail when the principle is still being fundamentally resisted?
Right, okay, well, interesting question. Barry, do you want to?
Oh.
That's a tough one.
I'll pass that one over to you.
Thank you very much.
But you've got a bit of experience of dealing with these
difficult customers,
but urban extensions and some of the regional allocations around the southwest.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a really fine balance here, isn't there, between wanting to encourage people to get involved and really participate, but also being honest with them. And my preference is always set up an honest framework first, and part of that is education, training. I mean, we run a lot of capacity building events around the southeast where we get people into a workshop and tell them about the planning system and how it works. And that means not only the good stuff, but also the bad stuff and the limitations and the difficulties. I think the first thing you shouldn't do when you're consulting with a community is say, oh, we've got a blank sheet of paper. Tell us what you want. Because that's actually fundamentally dishonest. And actually what you've got to do is say to the community, your consultation process or your involvement process is part of a bigger process, that there are other decisions that have been made that provide a context. And I don't think you can shy away from that. You've got to be absolutely genuine, absolutely open with the community about that, and say there are big constraints, there are parameters within which we've got to work. And sometimes it's something often they don't want to hear that, but you can't shy away from that reality.
Okay, I'm sure there's other people in the audience who've had that experience, but I'll come to you in a minute. But Jeff?
Yeah, just a good practical example I've been through pretty horrifically recently, which is actually the largest wind power project in South Wales, where I've been running all the community involvement on that. And we had real problems because the strategic decision on that was made by the Welsh Assembly Government through a process that I could not support at all, almost non-consultation, non-involvement at all. So we were then faced with engaging people. I was working with the developer, engaging people on how to make this development go forward. And of course, all we get at the first meetings is all we get is the fact from the strategy. And as Barry says, we were absolutely open and honest about it. We've recorded all that information, we've got it there, and we're actually telling people, and we're doing it already. We have fed that back to the Welsh Assembly Government. So they're not just hearing from me, they're not just hearing from the developer, they're hearing from the community about the inadequacy of the previous process, and we're storing all that information. And having done that, we're now getting out of people a lot of really interesting suggestions about the size of the turbines, the colour of the turbines, the location of them, the community benefits will come from it, and they're being really constructive about that side of it. And just as a completely different one, you can turn it entirely on its head. The community of Down Amney in Gloucestershire put in the biggest protest against their local plan a number of years ago because it was going to have 25 houses in their village. Well, terrible. We worked with them producing a village design statement and other things from them. And they developed it, they did it, they produced the village design statement, they produced some of the detail. And at the end of that process, we ended up with a plan that actually had 40 houses in their village. because they were in control of that process. They understood it, they'd shaped it, and they'd worked with it. It became theirs. So it isn't a question of reductionism, of reducing. You will always get less if you do a consultation and involvement properly. You can actually break out of that and come up with exciting, different and creative solutions if you do it properly.
Okay, Craig's dying to get in, but I just want to give the audience a chance. Anybody desperate to say something at this point? Craig.
I think you can inherit problems. I would actually go back on why did we inherit the problem.
Yeah,
There's
exactly.
the feedback. And for example, let's go on wind, because I can guarantee the audience would be split probably 50-50 on wind on this on the issue. And yet, if you go to Denmark, there are no objections to wind because their community owns it. They own it.
Yeah.
And that's so how did that happen? It's still big power, probably French power companies who are doing this sort of thing. Whereas in the UK, we have a slightly not quite sure how to do it because Europe's too far away. It's 22 miles away. It's a bit difficult to understand how things happen there. And so what we do is we rely on these big energy companies, and so we're already suspect about that. We rely on developers. Who are they? They drive Rolls Royces. We don't like them. So all of this wind is a bit of a conspiracy to screw up our beautiful English countryside. Well, it's not. It's the means by which we might be able to sustain some of our beautiful English countryside. And okay, there's big visual impact there. But when the community has an ownership and a stake, then things go very differently. And I'm not saying, oh, let's just give away, we'll just buy our way into that. And by ownership, I mean that the big decisions have also been made, and so you change the constraints you work within, and that's democracy. And so it's not just about bottom up, it's about changing governments, and it's about changing our local authorities and the whatever political colour we think we want to do. And if we're going to do anything in this country, we have to re-engage with the democratic process because it is getting very worryingly thin.
Well, let's just test your assumption, shall we? Let's ask the question of the audience. Who in the audience is in favour of wind energy as a solution to some of our energy problems at the moment? Put your hands up if you think yes. And if you think no, put your hands up now.
Oh.
Well, Craig, Craig, you've misjudged the audience.
Would you like to move to South Wales?
Quick! Wind turbine looking for you. To look next to.
Lady there with the yellow top.
Yes, I just want to say Craig picked up on a very interesting point that I've been reading a lot recently. It's about the ownership and the projection of your personal space and therefore taking responsibility for this space. Are we talking about going back to socialistic ideas of ownership, public ownership of the land? Do you think that would be more constructive in terms of community involvement when, community owns the land and therefore gets more involved in the decisions that go along with this land?
Well, shall we go to our resident Marxist?
I'm going to surprise you there. I mean, one of the dangers I do see in community involvement is communities declaring UDI.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Personally, I think that good community involvement is a combination of bottom up and top down. It's where top down meets bottom up. And there are several reasons for this. I mean, we've been just talking about decisions about wind power. These are not just decisions that can be made by local people. Mm-hmm. These are decisions that have to be made in a national context as well, because they're about the future of all of our environment. They're about the future of climate change. And I wouldn't be happy, personally, leaving responsibility for that decision just to the people who live in a local community where an application comes in. Somehow we have to wed and stitch together a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach.
Good. Cleo, I'm going to come back to you and ask you whether you relate to those answers. You asked about housing allocations. You've got an answer that's mainly been about wind farms, but I think there is some parallel between the two things. What do you think?
Yeah, I think some really good comments have been raised, particularly about, I think, to move forward, I think we do need to sort of be open and honest and actually say this has gone on, this is where we are now, and this is and how and sort of collaboratively then worked actually taking things forward to get an optimum result for the local planning authority and for our communities.